When Sakobi the Snake Girl entered onto the Nigerian home video scene in 1998, it didn't just scare audiences, it fascinated them. The film, directed by Zeb Ejuru and packed with horror, folklore, tragedy, and moral lessons, quickly became one of the most iconic and talked about movies of late 90s Nollywood. Now, decades later, let's look at the cast of Sakobi the Snake Girl and where they are now. At number 10, we have Sakobi, who was the emotional center of Sakobi the Snake Girl. He played Frank Davis, a man torn apart by greed, desperation, and ultimately regret. From the very first scene, it's clear that Frank is a man weighed down by life's pressures, his failing business, his struggling family, and his growing sense of inadequacy. When Patrick introduces him to Sakobi and the Kongodi cult, you can almost understand why he takes the bait. But it's Frank's decision to sacrifice his own daughter, Hope, that changes everything. That moment when he places his innocent child on the altar is one of the most disturbing and unforgettable scenes in Nollywood horror. His expression, a mixture of conflict, fear, and blind ambition, is hard to shake. He ended up not sacrificing his daughter but chose to shorten his life so that he could enjoy wealth. In Sakobi 2, the final battle, Frank's character takes a deeper turn as he begins to uncover the true cost of his decisions. The scene where he meets Sakobi's family and learns that she was once human too adds a strange sense of irony and tragedy to the whole affair. Sakobi was much more than just his role in Sakobi. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, he was one of the kings of Nollywood, known for his polished look, his calm but authoritative presence, and his deep voice. Sakobi starred in a number of blockbuster home videos like Candlelight, State of Emergency, Goodbye Tomorrow, Heart of Gold, and Executive Crime. Whether playing a tough detective, a romantic hero, or a principled man caught in webs of corruption, he always delivered performances that were sharp and memorable. He also moved into production and directing, using his platform to tell deeper, more socially relevant stories, but by the 2010s, his presence began to fade a little. He was seen less frequently on screen, and there were rumors of private struggles and health issues. Many fans wondered what had happened, especially since he was one of the poster boys of Nollywood's golden era. Tragically, Sakobi passed away on May 7, 2023 at the age of 57. The news hit the industry hard. Tributes poured in from fellow actors, fans, and industry professionals who remembered not just his iconic roles but also his professionalism and the dignity with which he carried himself. He had reportedly been battling health complications in private, and his passing was a devastating loss to Nollywood. At number 9, we have Tony Umez. He brought a layered intensity to his role as Patrick, playing the trusted friend of Frank Davis, who, in trying to help his friend get rich, ends up dragging him into the deadly clutches of the Kongodi cult. Patrick is not a villain in the traditional sense. He isn't evil for the sake of it, but rather a deeply conflicted man who's already knee-deep in the consequences of his own choices. He introduces Frank to the snake girl Sakobi, perhaps out of loyalty, desperation, or even envy, but it becomes clear that even he doesn't fully understand what he's dealing with. His own family ends up paying a heavy price, particularly in the scene where Sakobi, having taken human form, attends a lavish party and suddenly goes into a trance-like state, bites Patrick's wife, and infects her with venom. That scene is unforgettable, not just because of the horror but because of the look of shock and helplessness on Patrick's face. Tony Umez played that moment with so much raw emotion that viewers could feel the character's soul collapsing. Another iconic moment comes in Sakobi 2, the final battle, where Patrick, seemingly a little wiser and more terrified than before, tries to warn Frank about the consequences of the pact they made. After Sakobi, Tony Umez's career didn't just continue, it exploded. He became one of the most visible faces of Nollywood's golden video era, whether he was playing the romantic lead, the loving husband, the betrayed friend, or the dangerous villain. Umez always brought a certain flair and gravitas to his roles. He starred in a string of successful and memorable movies in the early 2000s, such as Blood Sisters alongside Genevieve Naji and Omotola Jalade, Billionaires Club, which was similar to Sakobi in its themes of greed and occult power, and Reggae Boys. He was everywhere and he became so recognizable. Throughout the 2010s, Umez remained active in the industry even as Nollywood shifted more into high-budget cinema and streaming platforms. He adapted well, appearing in newer films and series that bridged the old school and the new wave of storytelling. As of 2025, Tony Umez is still still going strong. He's become something of a Nollywood elder statesman, occasionally popping up in interviews to reflect on the industry's growth and even sharing funny, heartwarming content on his social media pages. At number 8, we have Susan Patrick. She was unforgettable in the role of Sakobi. She wasn't just a horror figure in the traditional monster scene, she was seductive, mischievous, terrifying, and strangely sympathetic, all at once. As Sakobi, she played a supernatural being summoned by the Kongodi cult to seduce and manipulate Frank Davis into sacrificing his daughter in exchange for wealth. Her first appearance in the movie is iconic, emerging from the forest, transforming from snake to human form, her beauty and mystic immediately putting both Frank and the audience under a spell. One of the most chilling and iconic scenes comes during the party where Sakobi, under the influence of her snake nature, enters a trance and bites Patrick's wife. Her cold expression, the eeriness of the build-up, and the chaos that follows make it one of the film's standout horror moments. But what truly set Susan Patrick apart was how she infused Sakobi with emotional depth in Sakobi 2, The Final Battle. There's a moment where she confronts her own pain, torn between her loyalty to the cult and her growing affection for Frank. After Sakobi, Susan Patrick didn't appear in many other high-profile roles. She starred in Women in Love in 2006, but by then she was already on her way out of the industry. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Susan stepped away from acting altogether following the death of her husband in 2006 due to leukemia. That loss changed the course of her life and led her into a long period of silence from the public eye. For years, there was only whispers about what had become of her, with fans occasionally asking where the woman who once terrified and enchanted us had gone. Then in 2023, in a surprising twist, Susan Patrick announced her desire to return to Nollywood. Fans celebrated the possible return of the original Snake Girl, hoping to see her on screen again, perhaps not in horror roles, but in the kind of dramatic, layered characters that could channel her emotional range. At number 7, we have Patience Ogre. She played the role of Nene, the quiet but resolute friend of Dora Davis. Nene was not the loudest in the room, but her presence always came with a moral compass and grounded energy. She stood beside Dora not just as a friend, but as a spiritual ally, someone who still believed in prayer, scripture, and the power of good to overcome the dark schemes that engulfed Frank's life. Nene stood as the last line of hope for Dora and her daughter, a reminder that evil doesn't always win. Another memorable scene is when Nene consoles Dora as she breaks down under the weight of her husband's betrayal. There was no overacting in that moment, just real emotion and friendship. Nene reminded Dora and the audience that sometimes holding someone's hand and praying with them is an act of rebellion. Outside of her memorable performance in the Sakobi franchise, Patience Ogre didn't make any big return to screens or streaming platforms. Unlike many of her peers who used Sakobi as a launchpad, Patience seemed to either step back from acting or drift into quieter, undocumented roles. Next up at number 6, we have Gloria Ogunjiofor, who took on the emotionally loaded role of Dora Davis, the loving wife and mother who becomes a casualty of greed and betrayal in Sakobi. Dora wasn't just Frank's wife, she was his moral boundary, the one voice in his life trying to keep him grounded while he thirsted for wealth through diabolical means. When Frank fell under Sakobi's spell, it was Dora who paid the steepest price, not just emotionally but spiritually. Gloria brought a heavy dose of realism and vulnerability to the role. She was never over the top or dramatic just for effect. Her heartbreak felt real, could feel it in her trembling voice, in the way she held her daughter Hope tighter as the walls of their family life crumbled around them. Gloria Ogunjiofor's name resurfaced in 2009, more than a decade later, in a lesser-known film titled Edet, suggesting she didn't completely disappear from the screen. However, the long gap between Sakobi and Edet tells a story maybe of industry fatigue, personal commitment, or a lack of roles tailored to actresses like her who specialize in emotionally intense performances. Next up, at number 5, we have Doitila Oleka, who played the mighty serpent, the living hissing deity worshipped by the Kongodi cult, in a performance that left viewers stunned and maybe even spiritually shaken. The mighty serpent was divine wrath and the judgment that came when men like Frank thought they could manipulate spiritual powers for selfish gain. Doitila's portrayal was icy, intense, and spiritual in a way that felt deeply rooted in the Nigerian traditional sense. The most unforgettable scene for the mighty serpent, the one where Frank finally delivers his daughter Hope for sacrifice, and she rejects it. The entire ritual halts, smoke rises, the goddess gasps. Doitila's serpent doesn't roar or curse him with fire. She simply looks him in the eye and says the sacrifice is unworthy and that Frank will die a miserable death. Unfortunately, Doitila Oleka's career flickered out almost as quickly as it ignited. After delivering such a monumental role, there's nothing else documented in the public domain, no further film credits, no appearances, no interviews after her experience on set. At number 4, we have Mimi Ejiro, who played Hope Davis, the young girl whose innocence became the bargaining chip in her father Frank's deadly pact with the serpent cult. As the daughter of Frank and Dora, Hope was more than just a child in distress. She was the emotional center of the movie. Her presence reminded audiences of what was at stake. Mimi didn't have the loudest scenes, but the subtlety of her performance, the fear in her eyes, the way she clung to her mother, the disbelief as her father grew more monstrous made her unforgettable. The most gut-wrenching scene involving Hope is a sacrificial ritual. Tied, dressed in white, surrounded by chanting cultists, she is offered to the mighty serpent. But Mimi Ejiro's trail ends almost where it began. Aside from her appearance in both Sakobi films, she has no other known credits in Nollywood. There's a chance she was a child actor who moved on to other things. Many child actors from that era didn't transition into adult roles either by choice or by circumstance. Next up at number 3, we have Dusty Edet. He played a memorable character in Sakobi as the native doctor. In a film filled with supernatural elements and dark pacts, the native doctor was the voice of tradition, the bridge between the living world and the spiritual realm. His character was the one person who seemed to understand the rules of the dark game Frank Davis had entered, and he served as both a warning and a protector. When Frank's greed led him to the Kongodi cult and he was instructed to sacrifice his daughter in exchange for wealth, it was the native doctor who saw the danger and tried to help him find a way out. His most iconic scene came during a tense ritual in Sakobi, where he used incantations, charms, and ancestral invocations to try and protect Frank from the wrath of the cult, which resulted in his death. Outside Sakobi, Dusty Edet had appeared in another film, When Flowers Turn Black, in 1997, which also leaned into supernatural themes. However, like many of his co-stars, his acting career seemed to have a short-lived window. There are no known appearances in major Nollywood titles after Sakobi 2, and his name disappeared from industry conversation as the 2000s rolled in. At number 2, we have Emmanuel Frank, sometimes credited as Emmanuel France. He played the role of Sakobi's father in both films. His role was subtle but weighty. In the original film, his presence is mostly felt in the shadows, more of a background character, but in Sakobi 2, he steps forward as part of the revelation behind Sakobi's origin. Alongside Princess Ako's character, he completes the picture of a couple who, out of desperation and cultural pressure, made a pact with the devil. Well, in this case, the Kongodi. While his screen time was limited, the emotional resonance of his role was deep. Born in Kano, France began his acting career in 1960 and went on to become a beloved figure in Nigerian cinema. Known for his memorable roles in Doitila in 1996 and classics like Sakobi and The Snake Girl, Franz appeared in over 200 films throughout his storied career. He was especially renowned for portraying herbalists. Unfortunately, in September 2024, Franz passed away at the age of 83, leaving behind a rich legacy in Nollywood. At number 1, we have Princess Ako. She may not have been the flashiest character of Sakobi, the Snake Girl, but her role as Sakobi's mother was essential to the heart of the story. Appearing in both the original and its sequel, Sakobi 2, The Final Battle, she provided the backstory that explained the mystery of Sakobi's existence. She played the part of a desperate woman unable to conceive a child who turned to a dark spiritual kingdom, the Kongodi cult, for a solution. That decision ultimately led to the birth of Sakobi, a child with a beautiful human form but a snake's soul. Her character was not present just for exposition. She represented the emotional weight of the movie's mystical horror, especially in the sequel where she opened up about her sorrow and the consequences of dabbling in forbidden rites. After Sakobi, Princess Ako didn't continue acting publicly, at least not in ways that left a digital footprint. She walked away from acting to pursue a private life. Some actors of the era took on acting for passion or as a side project, and once the buzz faded, so did their visibility. Others were swallowed by Nollywood's inconsistent record-keeping during its rapid, unstructured rise in the late 90s and early 2000s.